Hi, I'm Dan Winter. This is a video to go along with the new article, goldenmean.info/Carrington event. The title of this presentation is The 2012 Story Based on a Profound Understanding of Plasma Science of the Plasma Universe and Implosive Compression. So, accompanying this article, you see here we have the reprint from the Seattle Examiner on 2012 May Bring the Perfect Storm. And the very sobering discussion is showing that all of the kind of New Age woo-woo conversation about 2012 is not entirely without scientific merit. Specifically, the prediction that there will be what's called a Carrington event is now highly probable. Others of our scientists, including Peter Taylor, author of goldenmean.info/fractality, not carbon, he is another of the former UN scientists who says even this year, May to October, very high probability of EMF pulse type Carrington event solar wind maximum. Remember, this Carrington event phenomenon, you have the three heaviest planets that shape the magnetopause of the solar system that functions as a lens that determines in what direction the solar max wind comes and basically whether we get toasted. There is precedent for the Carrington event. It is highly probable, as NASA is announcing, that these kinds of events may toast even a majority or certainly a large number of the major power company transformers, among other things, on the planet. And countries which are hit more directly may, in fact, as NASA themselves announce, even never recover. It's important to know that if you get a significant percentage of your power transformers knocked in your power grid, because we don't even have the equipment to replace them, if not for months or years, that there could be major bioregions that are without power for at least months or years with the ensuing chaos. It is strongly recommended that in a practical way, as you prepare for the next 2 years or a year and a half, that it's very useful to look around and think, what would you do if in your area you were without power for many months? And just make practical plans, water, seeds, food, that sort of thing. It's simply practical, as well as the usual high wind, high water. And indeed, we have this phenomena of the alignment of what Paul Laviolette calls the galactic superwave, which contributes to this compression event. And we're going to be talking about how it is that compression can be prepared for in a meaningful way. Here, Paul Laviolette, author of the Galactic Superwave and Other Materials, is describing how the great tsunami of the Indian Ocean, Boxing Day, was within hours of the arrival of the largest gamma-ray burst in recent history, and discussed the physics of the correlation, another example of that compression event. Paul Laviolette also talks about the galactic superwave theory and many physics predictions that came from the galactic superwave story in his book Earth Under Fire and elsewhere, his website etheric.com. Short summary that the equatorial alignment of the galactic equator, the solar equator, and the Earth equator, that when those equators line up, and here we have an animation for that, that when those three equators line up, you have a phenomena that increases the compression on the magnetism of the solar system and also brings a dust cloud which increases the internal heat. This animation here is from Nick Fiorenza, Erection of the Holy Cross. This animation is another animation that shows how the three perpendicular, the three planes of the galactic Earth and solar equator, as they nutate and precess toward closer to a 90-degree relationship with the 2012 event called the Erection of the Holy Cross. So, indeed, this galactic alignment helps us understand, be introduced to the plasma theory of the universe. And I suggest you look at some of the many websites on plasma universe theory. Essentially what we're saying here is that in physics the universe is 99.99% plasma. Plasma is a cloud of charge. And if it is fractal or phase conjugate at center, there's a centripetal force holding that together. It's actually a cloud of charge being the plus minus rarefaction compression of the ether. And when that cloud of charge has a centripetal force, namely fractal or phase conjugate at the center, it makes a plasma cloud, which is basically the physics of creation itself, namely that, for example, mass is compressed charge rotating. So this plasma universe theory is a good way to begin to understand the dynamics of the upcoming solar maxima kinds of event. It helps us to understand, for example, why the the dolmen were placed at tetrahedral latitudes, Cydonia and Giza, because you modulate the spin rates of planets to phase lock them with zodiacal spin better, more fractal, more self-embedded, and that will then create the centripetal force which stabilizes atmosphere, which in a way is a vindication of Kepler, as you know, that he was essentially right when he said the planetary orbits are the nesting of the platonic solids. What he really meant was that that nesting of the platonic solids, that is the planetary orbits, based on golden ratio, is effectively the cause of stable gravity and therefore stable atmosphere, as confirmed by spirosolaris.ca, who says the exponential order, the constant of linearity for the resulting planetary framework, the new math of the geometry of the solar system, is in fact golden ratio, because that is in fact how you make and stabilize gravity and therefore atmosphere. And we talked about the history of the galaxy, that the galaxy's pain, just like a human being's pain, is where fractality bleeds charge. So we saw that old picture of the galactic core where our particular spiral arm, the Orion arm, is torn and bleeding, and we know the story of that, the sort of history of the Orion Wars kinds of stories. We compared that to this Star Navigator's map of the galaxy from Voynich manuscript, and also sealing at Dendera. Let's see if we can find that image here. Here it is. On the right, you have a relatively accurate map of our galaxy. On the left, you have the picture from the famous Voynich manuscript. Rather impressive evidence that somebody was shamanically capable of navigating their aura to the point of view of being able to see the geometry of our galaxy before there were telescopes and radio astronomy to know what that map is. So your plasma can go there if you, as it were, get your show together. And in plasma universe theory, we talk about this, that the double cones of the massive geometry of, for example, Orion, are a good indication of how gravity is made, that those double cones, when they approach and converge, kiss in the nose like two pine cones, which is the physics of phase conjugation, which is the only known example of self-organization in optics, and now we know phase conjugate dielectrics are bioactive and create life, and I have invented phase conjugate magnetics, where like poles attract. And here we have the early picture of Orion in the Japanese woodcut. Notice the two double cones, and that became the symbol for Orion here, the Antarian conversion, the so-called Yod-He, Vav-He, two opposing light cones. If you pronounce indeed Yahweh and a spectrum analyzer, you make two opposing cones. Introduction to phase conjugation 101. We have our famous animation of the fact that the heart of Orion is pregnant with star birth and needs the investment of what we'd call consciousness, or a phase conjugate dielectric, that in fact our collective plasma as a gene pool can stabilize the birth of stars if we really understand what we're for, beginning with understanding how your plasma can go into the sun. And so this became the universal symbol for Orion. You see the two opposing cones, Antarian conversion. So we want to just understand this science a little bit more in terms of the plasma dynamics. The Hopi's name for that great cone was called Pesh Mei-10, the way of, or 1 less than 10, the way of the 9, and you see the double cones there. And that way of the 9 we now are going to see is the plasma physics of why a plasma storm self-organizes into 9 donuts, why you have 9 chakras, and Deep Space Nine, and 9 steps of Palenque, and Inferno, and Egyptian Ennead, etc., etc., and the 9 tetrahedron of the Sri Yantra, which is about to talk about that. If we understand this in plasma terms, we can understand how indeed we survived plasma compression, the solar wind, the 2012 event. Here we have some beautiful images of that from John Fanuzzi, showing us in an artistic way how to image how this compression works in the cone of the fractal based on golden ratio, and how that actually creates self-embedding, and we're going to see creates the geometry in which charge compression can be charge acceleration. We thank John Fanuzzi for these wonderful images. So now we're going to take a pause and move to part 2 of this presentation, the Whale Dreamer Plasma Storm. Welcome. This is part 2 of the Deep Fractal Plasma Science of the 2012 story from Dan Winter, goldenmean.info/Carrington event. In this part, we discuss the plasma science of the 9, starting with the Whale Dreamer's story. As you know, the Whale Dreamers film, funded by John Lennon's son, goldenmean.info/Whale Dreamers is the excerpt. We see that in the film, they're talking about this wave envelope, this plasma storm that hits, in this case, off of South Australia, and at the Bight, south of Adelaide, and where the whale dream is projected into the stars. And we're looking at the science from Los Alamos, the article from John McGovern, and the plasma science group at Los Alamos Institute. They mapped this plasma storm that hit the South Australian every 6,000 or so years. It's comparable to Shiva or Vishnu in an envelope, as we see here. The important dynamic to discover there was that that plasma storm actually was composed of 7 of these nested donuts. I'm sorry, 9. There were 9 donuts in that array, and it was discovered that, in fact, plasma storms in general self-organize into that array of the 9, as it were, accounting for why the Hopi called it, remember, the way of the 9, Peshmate and Deep Space 9 and all that, and why you have 9 chakras, 2 above your 7, because it takes 9 donuts in a plasma storm in a line to create that self-organizing life field, which is why there are 9 steps of Palenque, the pagoda, and also the Ennead and the Anunnaki Egyptian 9 concept. So when the plasma scientists discovered the geometry of that, if you see here, that the cross-section of that donut, one of the donuts in that plasma storm, had actually been carved by the shaman all around the earth because they had seen it and felt it in their body, as if to say, shamanically navigated that plasma storm. And that they saw the actual latitude where the shaman had carved the picture of the plasma storm, indicated their attitude with reference to it, indicated that, in fact, they knew that as they navigated their plasma body shamanically, Shem-An, as it were, they were actually seeing this giant body of God, as it were, and that's what the Plasma Universe websites are about, that the plasma shapes of the stars are, in fact, the shape of what was called God. And so we see that the 9 interdigitated golden ratio tetrahedron, which correspond to what's been called the Sri Yantra, in fact correspond to 9 interdigitated opposing vortex cones, literally phase conjugating. We have many images of that. And then there's that lovely film about that from, it's called The Last Mimsy. Let me get to the right slide here. And in The Last Mimsy, the kids are seen navigating into the stars in the shape of that Sri Yantra. If I can get this gadget to get a right animation here, 1 second. So the concept was that the double opposing vortex cones, which are how you insert your plasma into stars. There it is, again, from Last Mimsy. Sorry, we had a little burp here. So this is the film Last Mimsy, and it's about the Sri Yantra and how children use that to actually affect the power grid, and they do it from this perspective of the 9. So the last part of this presentation will be about understanding the physics of alphabets and how the plasma storm making a center helps us understand the science of alphabets. And sorry, our visuals aren't keeping up with us very well here. But remember we had in the Hebrew alphabet, we had the spiral on a donut, angle into compression, indexed by the spin of the tetrahedron. So if you form a Hebrew letter in your brain and focus on it, it causes the plasma donut, which is your optical cortex, to be tilted to that phase angle, and then you blow that donut and you send that smoke ring at that phase angle, that vortex. And if you nest them properly, you get a golem. So and that's sort of the Hebrew alphabet story here. You remember that story. Here's some of the animations about that. Remember, there's the hey as in yod, hey, vav, hey. But then we're going to just look briefly at the superset alphabet, the Ophanim Enochian, because it's so explicitly hypercubed dodeca, teaching us to do that phase shift, that implosion. So John Dee and Kelly saw these Ophanim letters in the plasma shape inside the green stone, and we recommend goldenmean.info/Ophanim, Ophanim, for this story. The point I want to make, though, is that after Vincent Bridges noted that those letters were arrayed in a hypercube, and that hypercube was this shape, you see the 6 around 1, 7 cubes would then compress on the outside in the tetracubic. What on the inside would be 5 cubes, which is the dodecahedron, which in our view is the only hypercube. And that creates this completed compression algorithm that you could blow the donuts, the vortex phase angles, to assemble them into the dodeca, the hypercube. And that would make implosion phase conjugation, and therefore the plasma storm of self-organization, the body of angels. And the skill to invoke the Ophanim angelic letters became the power of high magic, Golden Dawn, etc. Here we see the relationship of the origin of Greek to Ophanim Enochian. We see the shape, the letters in that tablet of Naljaj form the angel names Zavkiel, Zadkiel, Kunael, Raphael, Haniel, Mikael, Gabriel. That angel names are just those phase angles, that the body of angels is those angles. And that is related to the origin of Cherokee. We suspect the Cherokee Adawi star elders was in fact Ophanim, which is similar to the word Patal in Egyptian. So Darlene, in Vincent Bridges and Darlene's book on the Ophanim, goldenmean.info/Ophanim, analyzes these vortex cones in the origin of Ophanim Enochian. And this is the key slide right here. Let's see if we can see it clearly. But if you pass a plane through double cones, which is phase conjugation, you see that where the plane crosses the double cones gives you the index to the shapes of the letters. Now what that means is that when you form the letter in your mind and then you blow the plasma field at the angle toward center of double cone, it causes them to phase conjugate, and that's Mag, as in magic, matrix of Agni, fire, implosion. So what the double cones of the geometry of Ophanim Enochian was teaching you was the physics of plasma compression implosive brought to the center of the particular angle that is phase conjugation. So if you analyze the number and geometry of those cones in Ophanim Enochian, you're basically seeing how angels assemble their body, precisely what the current plasma physics agrees is the physics of what used to be called God, the shape of angelic bodies, as it were. So that became, as you know, the tablets of Hermes, which is Patal, Thoth, and that became the Banpo alphabet. And the Banpo, you know, the Cherokee and the Banpo, if you can make a flame with your mind, you are an initiate. This is the geometry of their alphabet. It is swastika, same as Holy Grail animation, and that is indeed how you make flame. Implosion of plasma with your mind. And that alphabet, Ophanim Enochian, became literally the movie Stargate, as you know, and that's the story of the Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean. But to close then with the sort of deep science behind this, if you assemble plasma fields which are phase conjugate or fractal, you make this fractal in time, which is the only way it emerges from chaos. And so this is from our article, goldenmean.info/coincidence, where we first prove that hydrogen is a fractal in time. Here you have Planck time times golden ratio precisely equals the palladium sputtering frequencies and the key frequencies of hydrogen from Canzias. And then you see that the same equation, proof of fractality in time, Planck time times golden ratio, gives you the solar year of the Earth, and it gives you the Venus year. And this is the pent geometry of sacred Venus. You see the animation of phase conjugation there. And this is the geometry of Venus for a reason. This is where Osiris is returning, if you read Testimony of the Virgin by Anton Parks, that the orbit, this is the picture of the reverse retrograde orbit of Venus. It's pent, phase conjugate, implosive, and fractal, and will survive solar compression by being fractal. So our equations earlier had shown that Planck length times golden ratio equals the radii of hydrogen, and Planck time times golden ratio equals the frequency of hydrogen. That fractality is how hydrogen is held together. So all this goes together to just say, here's the picture of the universe as dodecahedral and fractal, to just say that if in fact we assemble our magnetic fields to be fractal or phase conjugate, we have the best chance of surviving the solar wind. You know, the magnetic map of your bed and your house and your garden and your city needs to look like a rose, as does the map of Prague. So then you come up with this big picture that if we have the beingness to make centripetal force, we can, in fact, create the centripetal force to hold our solar system together in the presence of the solar wind. And in the last slide here, you see that when 1 million children sing at the same moment, this is an average of 11 events, the solar flares go ah and get peaceful. There's a reason for that. Focused human attention compresses charge, reduces radioactivity, and collective focused human attention has the centripetal force to cause the sun to become peaceful, and we need to discuss how we do that, and we think that that discussion is initiated here in discussing what was high angelic magic, but it's really how to make centripetal force and indeed prepare yourself for the compression wave that is the solar wind, the real physics of 2012. Thank you.